From the high desert and the great American Southwest, I bid you all good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be in the world's prolific time zones, each and every one of them covered by this program, Coast to Coast AM. I'm Art Bell. It is my honor and privilege to be escorting you through the weekend. This being the second day of that effort. Just really great to be on board with you, and I'm being peppered with questions, email, and Fast Blast, and all the rest of it. For example, Keith in San Anselmo, California. Art, are you and your wife in Pahrump temporarily till she has a baby? And are you both eventually returning to the Philippines? Well, who knows? I don't have the answer to that question yet. We own the condominium in Manila, and we are here until, I guess, my wife decides whether she wants to remain. As you know, it was not her first choice to come to the United States, and people ask, well, why did we? Well, that silly letter, that awful letter, going around, which has been going around actually the better part of a decade now, I think, that hate letter. Somebody wrote a hate letter, of all things, against Filipinos and sent it out in my name. Then it got published in newspapers there. And so it became a little dangerous, and that's more or less why we're here. Now, that won't go on forever. Or, on the other hand, it might. But as far as being here, I think we're here, you know, sort of semi-permanently. I mean, obviously, look, after the baby is born, we will take a trip back to the Philippines and show off the baby, you know, to her family. Nothing is forever. Boy, have I learned that in life. Nothing is forever. So right now we're here, and we'll be here until we're not. I guess that's the only way I can say it, but it looks like we're here. Let's look at the world news. Always fittingly depressing. Three legal immigrants, absolutely legal, in a cargo truck were detained at the Port of Miami Sunday on what was a routine inspection, which raised concerns for some reason. Police say the incident just might have stemmed in part from a language barrier. The port's cargo area was shut down Sunday as the Miami-Dade squad x-rayed the truck, scanned the whole thing for radioactive materials. Nothing unusual, but what was found at all. Two of Saddam Hussein's co-defendants, you may remember, were taken from their cells, told they were going to be hanged on the same day the former dictator was. Their lawyer said Sunday the two condemned men still are waiting as Iraqi officials try and decide how to avoid the kind of outcry that followed Saddam's hanging on December 30th. So they still live. A subway train derailed Sunday near downtown Washington, sending 20 people to the hospital, prompting the rescue of 60 from a tunnel. The accident happened at about 3:45 p.m. near the underground Mount Vernon Square station that serves two lines beneath the Washington Convention Center. I wonder why they never print good news. I've wondered about that all my life, and I know many of you do. Democrats now running Congress will not give President Bush a blank check to wage war on Iraq, according to the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, suggesting they could, well, perhaps deny him the money. If he calls for additional troops, they may not supply the money. Yet Pelosi's second in command and a Senate leader on foreign affairs questioned the wisdom and legality of using the power of the purse to thwart the White House as Bush prepared to announce his revised war strategy this week. And I've heard that includes about 20,000 more troops. That certainly would require money. And, of course, that's the way they have squished other wars. You know, just stop the money. The death toll from a riot at a Salvadoran prison rose to 21 after authorities on Sunday reported yet an additional fatality. Prison Director Roberto Villanova said the maximum security prison, about 40 miles west of the capital, San Salvador, will be under a state of emergency for 15 days. Warsaw's new archbishop abruptly resigned Sunday over revelations that he cooperated with Poland's communist-era secret police, stunning worshippers by sadly yielding the archbishop's throne just minutes before he was to be formally installed, to cries of "No, no, and stay with us" in and outside St. John's Cathedral. A very despondent Stanislaw Wiglas read a letter to Pope Benedict in which he offered his resignation, quote, "after deeply reflecting and assessing my personal situation." A Western Pennsylvania man's trying to solve a mystery that recently landed in his mailbox. It was a letter mailed more than 50 years ago and addressed to Frederick Zane Yost. The letter with a 3-cent stamp. Any of you remember a 3-cent stamp? And postmarked October 26, 1954, was encased in a large Postal Service window envelope. There is a return address in nearby Richland Township, but no sender's name. Well, maybe somebody in the administration felt the need to open it. Las Vegas. For more than a decade, Microsoft Corporation Chairman Bill Gates and others in the tech industry have touted a vision of a connected lifestyle, one in which digital content can move across devices throughout the home and be taken on the go. It's been a slow march, but as Gates kicked off the International Consumer Electronics Show late Sunday, the industry has come farther than ever in delivering on that promise. Kind of like robots. They never quite got here the way they were promised. All right, we'll take a break and look at some of the, as Paul would say, the rest of the news. Coming up in the next hour, Lynn McTaggart, and she'll basically be talking about the Force. That's right, the Force. It's a little more complicated than that, but it's going to be a very, 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 intent. It's going to be a very interesting interview. The remainder of this hour is going to be dedicated to open lines. So those of you who know the portal phone numbers are welcome to dial them now. If you have something of intense interest to this audience, and this audience does expect the unusual, then feel free to dial in. We'll be with you in just a moment. The Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority is expected to announce its decision next week regarding some very controversial work. A couple of British scientists who plan to mix human and animal cells in order to research cures for degenerative diseases. I'm not sure how good of an idea that is. However, the British scientists believe that their plan of creating a partly human and partly animal embryo, if halted, might hinder their work on potentially life-saving new treatments that could possibly benefit hundreds of patients. The hybrid embryos, if created, would be around 99.9% human and 0.1% animal in order to produce embryonic stem cells, the body's basic building blocks that can grow into all other types of cells. According to the Telegraph's UK edition, and I depend on them heavily for news that we don't get here, the new embryos would provide new hopes for patients suffering from diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cystic fibrosis, motor neuron disease, and Huntington's, all terrible. Dr. Stephen Minger at King's College London and Dr. Lyle Armstrong at the North England Stem Cell Institute in Newcastle are the two lead researchers on this project. They've assured us all that the hybrid embryos would be destroyed within just 14 days, a time when they have not started developing much. According to Dr. Minger, informally, we have been told by the HFEA they are unlikely to grant permission for our application at present. We have no therapies to even alleviate the symptoms for conditions like Alzheimer's, spinal muscular dystrophy, and motor neuron disease. Never mind make an impact on disease progression. I just think it's not a good idea. Could there be forbidden sequences in the genome? Forbidden? Interesting word, right? ones so harmful that they are not compatible with life? One group of researchers thinks so. Unlike most genome sequencing projects, which set out to search for genes that are conserved within and between species, their goal is to identify primes, DNA sequences, with chains of amino acids so dangerous to life they don't exist. It's like looking for a needle that's not actually in the haystack, said Greg Hempkin, professor of genetics at Boise State University in Idaho. He's leading this project. There must be some DNA or protein sequences that are not compatible with life, perhaps because they bind some essential cellular component, for example, and have therefore been selected out of circulation. There may be some that are lethal in some species, but not others. We're looking for those. But why? There must be some DNA or protein sequences that are not compatible with life and therefore have been selected out. To do this, he and his colleagues have developed software that calculates all the possible sequences of nucleotides, the letters of DNA, up to a certain length, and then scan the sequence databases, for example, the U.S. National Institutes of Health Gene Bank, to identify the smallest sequences that aren't present. Those that don't occur in one species but do in others are termed nullimers, while those that aren't found in any species are termed primes. That's really, really strange stuff, in my opinion. Very strange. And it sounds as though, and I could be wrong, but it sounds as though they're looking for something, well, they said it themselves, that would be incompatible with life. Now, why would you want to find that unless you were contemplating putting something together that would be harmful to life? Now, I could be way off base with that, and probably am. It just sounds that way in the story. Let's go west of the Rockies and say hello, Larry in Idaho. Hello, Larry in Idaho. For some reason, I'm not getting audio. They're going to have to turn it up on the other end there, or something. Hello, Larry in Idaho. Do you hear me, Larry? Going once.
Yes.
Going. Are you there, Larry?
Yes, I am.
You are. Where were you, buddy?
Going to get my glasses so I could see what you said.
So you could see what I said.
Sir?
All right, then read my lips.
Okay.
You get that? I'm just messing with you. What's up?
Yeah. Two questions. Did you get a 360-degree picture of Manila?
I did not. One of those pan pictures?
Well, this was some weeks ago, and I sent it to the address of the Premier Radio.
Oh, wrong. Send it again. Send it to, are you ready?
About as ready as I can get.
Okay, artbell@mindspring.com.
Oh, that's on the computer.
That's true.
I don't have one.
Oh. You don't have a computer?
No, sir.
How can you live in this day and age without a computer?
You'd be surprised how wonderful it can be without a computer.
Really?
Yes, sir.
I guess I might be.
Well, that was the number one question.
Okay, well, if you send it to Premier Radio, it will probably, maybe, eventually get to me.
Well, we'll see. I thought you would be interested in it, but now you're not in Manila anymore.
Oh, well, I still own a condominium there, sir, so I'm very interested in Manila, and I'd very much like to get it, actually.
I understand that. And I think I told you at the time I was there 60 years ago. So that kind of puts the number on me. Now I've got a better one for you.
Okay.
You're really fond of the UFO story, right?
You mean UFOs are something I look into on the program? Yes, of course.
Sir. Well, I know of a 110-year-old newspaper which has on the front page a UFO story.
A 110-year-old newspaper?
Roger.
What paper is it?
Well, do you want me to tell you on the air?
Well, yeah, sure.
Okay. It's the newspaper itself was called Silver Star. However, in recent years, it was changed to the Dolores Star.
Okay. From where?
Dolores, Colorado.
Dolores, Colorado. I'd love to see that.
In 1897.
But again, you're going to have to send it in the mail, right? And I really don't have a mail address you can send to other than Premier. Now, if you send it to Premier now, it'll be safe because they'll be able to get it to me. So I guess that's the way you're going to have to do it.
Well, maybe you ought to have a contest to see who can find the oldest reference in the world of UFOs.
Well, that's one of them. No question about that. So feel free to fire that off to me. I'd really appreciate it. That's a long time ago. To me, modern ufology began really around 1947, I would say. But, there were those cave paintings and all the rest of it. So perhaps as long as human beings have been gazing into the heavens, they've been seeing things they cannot identify. What do you think? East of the Rockies, Matthew in Florida. Hi.
Got me?
I got you.
Oh, cool. Well, I've been studying the conspiracy theory subculture, and what I'm worried about now is it's almost a setup to me because worst case scenario, there could be a disaster or whatever that could try to rift the conspiracy theory subculture from the national identity of America.
Well, what a tragedy that would be.
Well, it would be because, you had a call last night about the whole September 11th thing, and I don't even want to take one side or the other now because it's getting so heated, if you understand. But it's almost like the reaction to it is itself a controlled phenomena to a disaster. The reaction to disaster is itself a controlled phenomena. And
I can't think of a major disaster or killing or mass killing, as in 9/11,
right,
that has not generated the kind of thing you're talking about. All of them do in America. America loves conspiracies.
Right. I know you probably haven't had Alex Jones on. I heard the caller last night, but
No, I have never had Alex Jones on.
I'm not taking his side or your side or anyone's side because there's even anti-Alex Jones websites that are kind of scary, and I'm not even going to go into those. But you should have Alex Jones on, Tex Mars, Whitley Strieber, David Icke, and...
Well, I had Whitley on the other day.
Right. You need to have a night where there's a round table about just the conspiracy subculture itself and the phenomena of the culture itself.
Well, it is interesting. I'll give you that.
You isolate it like that. I've got some crazy theories. The craziest theory is the most conservative American Indians believe that modern Homo sapiens evolved in the Western Hemisphere 250,000 years ago, I think. But
you think that's the craziest?
Well, there's crazier than that.
Yeah, there is.
We can go to old Earth creationism. There's even people who believe that the ruins on Mars are from pre-Adamic man.
Yeah, I know. And there's people who think the Earth is still flat, too.
Yeah, there's a very small amount of the population.
And there's others that think the Earth is hollow.
Well, there's a better chance of it being hollow than flat.
You think?
Well, there might be even underground caves, those stories. Not quite a hollow Earth, but a hive-like Earth. It's like the Earth's like a living thing.
Now I'll tell you what. I'd go for that one first.
We're a smaller version of the sun, so we don't have enough mass to fire, but there's like a little nuclear reactor, well, not little, but a nuclear reactor or a fusion reactor at the core. What else would the core be?
I think that, in a way, our Earth is alive, and there are frequencies, sir, that are generated that resonate with our human brain. So I don't think that's so wild to believe that Mother Earth is in a way alive and that we are affected by things that happen on Earth.
I've had weird experiences. I might have been out of my body the other night.
You might be out right now, for all I know.
But then there's ley lines. There's the magnetic lines of the magical energy that goes over the Earth. I've always been into this role-playing game, Shadowrun, which was the first place I even heard of the Mayan calendar.
It's only magical if you don't understand them.
Well, there's a science. If you buy the Shadowrun game books, they scientifically talk about magic. It's another dimension. Some people have the gene to manipulate mana, which is the magical energy. That's what they use. They use the term mana. It's like it would be the system international measurement of magical energy.
I thought it was bread.
manna and bread kind of the same, or juice, or mojo. That's all the same.
All right, well, listen, I will take under advisement your idea to do sort of a round table on the whole, not on specific conspiracy theories, mind you. But I will definitely take under advisement looking at the conspiratorial mind in America. There's not one major incident you can name that has not generated around it conspiracies. You know, the killer on the knoll. And, well, I could go on, but I really can't. The clock. I'm Art Bell. Thank goodness for Fast Blast. I mean, how cool is this? Breaking news, folks. From the Associated Press, space probes that visited Mars 30 years ago might have stumbled upon alien microbes on the red planet and inadvertently killed them. According to a scientist theorizing in a paper released Sunday, today, the problem was the Viking space probes of 1976 and 7 looking for the wrong kind of life and then not recognizing it, the researcher said in a paper presented at the meeting of the American Astronomical Society in Seattle. Yikes. This new report, based on a more expansive view of where life can take root, may have NASA looking for a different type of Martian life form when its next Mars spacecraft is launched later this year. Wow. Last month, scientists excitedly reported the new photographs of Mars showed geologic changes that certainly suggest water occasionally flows there. Even now, the most tantalizing sign that Mars is, in fact, hospitable to life. So, in other words, we may have found life and accidentally killed it. Back to open lines in a moment. By the way, I'm getting a lot of Fast Blasts asking, how's my wife doing? Erin's doing just fine. She's enjoying herself. I managed to get, God bless DirecTV, I managed to get a special world dish. Now, they can install that, and if you're from another country somewhere, you should know that. They're able to install a special satellite dish, and it picks up all the Philippine networks. So she gets at least 6 or 7 Philippine TV stations, the one she would normally watch, which is amazing to me, absolutely amazing. What a world we live in. And moreover, earlier in the day today, she found Philippine radio. It also comes along, I guess, with the Philippine package, and we were able to listen to 101.9, which was indeed our favorite radio station in Manila. All of that coming right from the sky. Simply, absolutely amazing to me. Simply amazing. Let's go to the international line. Chris in Alberta, Canada. Hi.
Yeah, hey, Art. I had a question about the Area 51 caller about, 4 or 5 years ago, a long time ago. And if that radio transmission was, in fact, canceled by government intercept, was that verified, or do you know anything about that?
I know a whole lot about it. Now, you're referring really to two different things. During the call from that Area 51 caller, we lost our satellite link, is what happened.
Right.
And what actually began happening, the satellite actually, in space, began to tumble. And, of course, when it tumbles, you lose the antennas are spot beams, and you lose that immediately. You lose sync, and you lose signal, and it's gone. So that's, if you want to call it a coincidence that occurred during that wild call, I'll never forget it, but that's what happened.
Yeah, I had a request. Maybe you could go ahead and do that special request line maybe one of these weekends here again. That possibility?
You mean an Area 51 line?
The Spill the Beans line, maybe sometime.
Yeah, I could do that.
Yeah, because that guy sounded pretty genuine. It'd be pretty hard to kind of put on something the way that he ended up doing that. So
I know. All right, sure. I will consider doing an Area 51 Spill the Beans line. No problem. The problem is getting people who are willing to call up and do exactly that, spill beans. Believe me, if you work at Area 51, you virtually sign away your soul. And they're not kidding. So getting somebody to call up who's worked at Area 51 and really tell what's going on is no small matter. Let's go to Robert in California. You have achieved the air. Hi, Robert.
How you doing, Art?
Just fine.
Yeah, two quick questions for you. The first, do you watch anime at all?
Do I watch what?
Animated, like Japanese animation?
Oh, sure.
Okay, there's a series of anime that I like to point out to you called Crest of the Stars and Banner of the Stars. And it kind of goes in line with genetic manipulation in respect that eventually, in order to travel deep space, we're going to have to change ourselves. I don't think in our physical state, the way with the technology we have now, number one, we wouldn't live long enough, and number two, I don't think we could physically deal with the anti-gravity, not having any gravity.
No, you're exactly right. Human beings are not designed for interstellar space travel at all. We simply couldn't do it.
But what's interesting about this series is they claim that they were manipulated from the original Earth people. This is fast forward maybe 8, 9, 10,000 years down the line, where you have several different factions. These people, they're called the Ob, the genetically manipulated people. But you can actually become an Ob because they're like a state. And then you've got the Empire Mankind, and then you've got all the little independents, and the two of them are trying to gobble up control of all these different factions. But
right, and where do you see this, sir?
I actually caught it on G4 network when they used to be called Tech TV, but you can go out and rent them from any reputable video store. They should have them.
All right, I will look into it. It's clear that the human race is not designed for that kind of travel. Our muscles would atrophy. I believe when astronauts go up and spend, what do they spend these days, 3 months or more on the International Space Station, everything begins to atrophy. And that's just in low Earth orbit. So obviously, with the time required to get from here to anywhere else, virtually anywhere else, and particularly out of the system, we're simply not designed for it. Now, there may be a way that human beings could be put in some sort of form of stasis. And I think when you see most science fiction movies that show long space travel, that's exactly what's done. They're put in some little chamber and they're frozen or, put under in some way. And I'm sure that's exactly what would have to occur. On our fourth wild card line, John in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You're on the air.
Hey, Art. How are you?
Very well.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to share a couple experiences with you from out of my body. Started back when I was in school. I woke up one evening and there was an entity on my chest, and I tried to get up and it slammed me back down. And I was kind of freaked out by the whole thing because I had never been conscious and had a spirit on top of me or gotten out of my body. But the point being, all of a sudden, I kind of focused in on this electric space heater we had, and it just kind of sizzled and blew up. But if I wasn't awake, I would have never caught it. But continuing on a couple years, I was able to have these out-of-body experiences. And the one thing I really wanted to share with the listeners is I never knew about I guess you guys call it the old sea hag. But I was actually down in Florida with my family on vacation, and I woke up with an entity on my chest, and I never really could see a picture of what the entity looked like until the first time was down in Florida, where I saw this old, scary sea hag, kind of witch-looking entity on top of me, and I never really could put anything together on it until I heard your show. So just wanted to share that with you.
I'll be darned. I don't recall talking about a sea hag, but anything on your chest unexpectedly that's an entity is going to get your attention. How'd you get rid of it?
Yeah, I'm with you. When one of your previous shows, I heard some of your callers talking about the old sea hag, the old sea witch. That
I see. No, I'm asking how you got rid of the one on your chest.
She just appeared and tried to get up and got slammed back down, and then within a minute or two, that spirit, that thing was gone. But it's very frightening. But I haven't had any experiences for a number of years, but it was a short duration, a couple of years that it was happening, and I'm glad that it's finally gone.
Well, I'm glad you're hagless now, too. I've never had anything of that sort happen to me, and I don't really want it to. That's really weird. Can you imagine waking up with some sort of anything on you, some sort of entity that doesn't appear human? Oh, my God. Let's go here. On the first wildcard line, it's the cat lady. She's calling herself from Modesto, California. Hi.
Hi. I didn't identify myself the last time, but I'm the lady that had mentioned the anti-gravity forces that built the pyramids through meditation.
Yes. Oh, yes, okay.
Uh-huh. And you had a good program. I thought the fellow was real interesting that you had on that night. What I wanted to discuss with you was, and you can stop me when I shouldn't mention something, but we had here in Modesto, a fellow that had a death experience. This was years ago, and if people would like to read about it, they can go on the computer to Not Afraid to Die, and his name was Jim Sepulveda. He went to a Chester Smith meeting in Stockton when Chester was he was not doing his music, he was doing,
Okay, well, what he had was a near-death experience, right?
Yes,
Because
thank you. Yes, a near-death experience, yes. And he wasn't a churchgoer. In fact, everything that I know about Jim is what he told me first person. It's not third person. But this experience completely changed his life. When he went to that service that night, he had a healing there. Threw away his medicine. The doctor thought he was doubling up on his medicine, so to prove to the doctor that he was not, he agreed to undergo, I guess it's called a catheterization, where you go to the groin up into take a picture of your heart.
yes.
It's either that or an angiogram. I don't remember which. But this was in Doctor's Hospital here.
What was the bottom line? I mean, he had a near-death experience and became religious as a result of it?
Pardon me?
He became religious as a result?
Absolutely. It completely changed his life because he said that wherever he went to this place, and he said the grass was greener than any green he'd ever seen. The sky was bluer than any blue he'd ever seen. In the far distance, he saw something, I think he mentioned like a tree. He walked toward it. He saw a pair of sandals. He looked up, and he was facing Jesus, who told him that he had work for him to do. He came back on the table when they had him all covered up with a white sheet. To make the story short, the x-ray showed that there was nothing any longer wrong with his heart. He was completely healed, and he convinced the doctor that, the story that he had been telling was true. So the people in the different little towns around here, Riverbank, Oakdale, and all these little towns, began to have him come to tell what happened to him. And his fame spread all through California, and pretty soon he was going all around the world. He has since left. He was here for 17 years longer. He did not die of a heart attack or anything. He was boarding a plane to come back to home here in Modesto, and they said he was dead before he even hit the ground. And
of
that
what?
Was a number of years ago.
Of what?
They didn't. There was no diagnosis made. They said he was just gone.
Okay. Well, I guess it happens, and those miracles do happen. I mean, the doctor I had on last night, one of the very first stories he told was of a man he had examined in order to call the fact that he was dead. No heartbeat, no brain activity, no breathing, nothing that would indicate life. A very careful examination, and 30 minutes later, the guy sat up and was talking, not particularly coherently, according to the doctor, but was talking. Now, how does that happen? How in the world does that happen? But it did. So there are many things in this world of ours that that the scientists, the doctors, those who should know, don't know. And that makes me wonder why they are the majority of them, so adverse to learning about the unusual things that just simply don't make sense. They're scientists. They should be curious when something like that happens that should not happen. But they're not. They just sort of let it go. West of the Rockies, John in San Diego.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Oh, thank you very much, sir, for having me on your show. It's been a while. I haven't talked to you, I guess, about 10 years ago, with Mr. Jim Wilkerson, Channel 10 News, reporting 300 documents on UFO by Army Intelligence Fort Meade.
Yes.
Oh, great. You remember.
I do.
Well, sir, as of recently, a couple months ago, I received another amazing letter from Army Intelligence Fort Meade, and this has to do with a website that has everything about UFO. There are about 9,800,000 reports on UFOs, and some are old, some are new, and some are classified. And the old ones date back to the 40s and the 50s.
All right, John. Well, here's what I would say. I would say sit down, fire the address off to me. And for the rest of you, anybody who would like to send me email, you're welcome to. I am Art Bell at mindspring.com. That's the main address. ARTBELL at mindspring.com. MINDSPRING.com or artbell at AOL.com. The Mindspring address holds a little more, so I'd sort of recommend that one. Let's see. Let's go to Richard in Houston, Texas. You're on the air.
Yeah, Art, I have a copy of National Geographic, April 1972.
Yes, sir.
Talking about weather, and as of that year, the average weather damage was 11 billion per year. And in 1934, this is from that National Geographic, on Mount Washington, New Hampshire, there's a naval observatory up there. They clocked winds at 231 miles per hour, straight line winds, at 6,300 feet. And grapefruit-sized hail in Coffeyville, Kansas, that was 1934. I think that was before I was born.
Yes,
one
sir.
year before. And the most rainfall in 1 year was in India in 1860. They had 1,042 inches in 1 year.
It's a lot of rain.
So this strange weather phenomenon is not new. There may be more of it now, but it's been strange weather for hundreds of years.
Well, of course, sir. Weather is chaotic, absolutely chaotic. Weather is chaotic. It's the nature of weather to be chaotic, but don't be deceived. What is new is this global warming that we're going through. Now, we can carefully chart the difference and the increases in temperature, and if you doubt it for a moment, take a look at the progression, for example, of what's occurred at the North Pole. It is now 40 or 50% melted, maybe even more. I've seen some photographs that show the North Pole to be about two-thirds melted. They're beginning to chart ways to navigate, the Navy is charting ways to navigate the North Pole through what was once ice and is now water. And that is progressing at such a fast clip that a lot of us believe the switch has been thrown. And by that I mean the progression of the melting is becoming faster and faster and faster and faster. The more it melts, the more it melts. And the reason for that is that normally ice would reflect sunlight. If you have ice, you've got a very reflective surface, and it reflects sunlight. Now, as it melts, you get more water. Water, on the other hand, absorbs sunlight. So it's kind of a self-propelling process. The more melting you get, and in the next very few years, there's going to be no ice at all at the North Pole. Already, polar bears are beginning to drown. They depend on floating ice to live. Well, guess what? There's no more, or there's very little, not enough floating ice to support the polar bears, so they're dying left and right at the North Pole. The sheets of ice that are on land on the South Pole, Antarctica, they're beginning to become unstable, and should they go into the water? Here I am. Yes, indeed. Lynn McTaggart's coming up in a moment. First, a quick note. I get all of these questions on Fast Blast. Everybody wants to know about our cats. Well, our cats will be here in about a week. They're actually going to make their way through Europe They go all the way around. They're going to go to Europe, and then they'll fly here. And so our two cats, Abydos, Yeti, and our Philippine adoptee, Dolly, will all fly here, I might add, at a cost about, it costs double, if not almost triple, to fly cats from point A to point B. Yes, it's all the way across the world, other side of the world, but it really is extremely expensive. So anyway, they fly in about a week. Now, Lynn McTaggart began work on The Field 4 years ago. It was a personal quest. Her research took her to several areas around the globe, meeting with top frontier scientists in Russia, Germany, France, England, South America, Central America, and the USA. During these meetings, she saw what these scientists were working on, and it seemed to overthrow the current laws of biology, chemistry, and physics. Their theories and experiments also compounded into a new science, a new view of the world, if you will. For several years, she immersed herself in quantum physics and pored through hundreds of scientific papers to decode what was often simply impossible to do. In many cases, she had to pester the scientists to explain aspects of physics in order to check facts and interpretations. Lynn concludes that her work paints a picture of an interconnected universe and a new scientific theory which makes sense of all this supernatural phenomena that we talk about so often on this program. In a moment, Lynn McTaggart. Lynn McTaggart, welcome to Coast AM.
Hi there, Art. It's great to be back.
It's good to have you. Really is good to have you. You're really looking into a field that has my full attention, Lynn.
Well, that's fantastic because I think the latest work that we've done is going to get everybody involved.
Okay. The field, you're calling it The Field. Why do you call it that?
Well, this is my work that I originally did that really took me into this whole area. I was looking at things like homeopathy and spiritual healing, and because I have a newsletter that looks at medical, called What Doctors Don't Tell You, that looks at all the medical information to see what works and what doesn't. I study scientific literature all the time, and I kept coming across these studies showing that this stuff really works. And I wondered to myself, well, if this is true, then something about the way that we work and the way the universe works must be beyond what current science says. And so it really set me on that quest around the world to find out what it was that could explain this phenomena. And the field actually stands for the 0-point field, which is a quantum field that unites everything like an invisible web.
All right, let's back up just a little bit. And you said you studied it and it works, as in healing. Can you give me what you consider the best evidence?
For healing, for mind over matter things.
Yes.
That the fact that things. Well, this is everything that I've been looking at since. And my new book, The Intention Experiment, looks at all of that, the power of intention. And when there's just enormous evidence that I've come across. Mind has been able to affect everything from machines and single-celled organisms to complicated things like human beings. And there's just been enormous amount of evidence. This is what I have to laugh at when people say this. The skeptics say this stuff isn't proven. It's just not true. There's just hundreds and hundreds of studies of all of this.
All right, let's say I don't believe it. Convince me. What do you know that convinced you that it really works?
The science of it. I started looking at the very frontier of science. After I published The Field, I felt I really needed to look into the whole idea of intention. And people were bandying it about so much that I thought, okay, well, let's find out what intention is. So I thought, well, again, being of a kind of a show-me personality, I really need to have science to convince me. I started looking at all the frontier science to see, okay, what evidence is there that consciousness affects matter out there? Mm-hmm. And I started looking at just what were the latest quantum physicists' view of physical reality. And there were two things that really convinced me. One is that big reality, the stuff that we see, the sticks and stones reality of our world, is not set, is not final. They found in latest studies that even things like molecules are in a state of becoming. They're in a state of what physicists call superposition. In other words, they haven't collapsed into any one single state yet. There was that. And there's also the idea that living things are transmitters and receivers of information. We receive light all the time. So there's a little information transfer going on all the time between living things. Mm-hmm. So I found what I thought was a perfect mechanism for intention. And then there's also studies showing that when someone sends a thought out there, it's received in all aspects of the receiver's body. That it affects their heart, their brain, their skin conductance, all sorts of things.
Okay. I guess what I'm asking for is you traveled extensively. I mean, you were in Russia. You were all over the place. I take it that you examined. There are people who claim they can heal. Yes. They claim they can heal either in person or even remotely can heal with intention. Now, what have you actually seen done?
Okay, I've seen studies, and first of all, I've seen intention masters, and I've talked to intention masters, and I've seen what they could do. I've seen evidence of Qi masters, Qigong masters, being able to throw people across a room with their thoughts. I've seen a video of that. I've seen evidence where I've seen very, very good evidence that people on one part of America could send their thoughts to heal people on another part of America, and then that worked. I've seen evidence that people could calm down other people with their thoughts.
Lynn, have you actually followed it up, Lynn, with medical? For example, let's say somebody in New York heals somebody in California.
Yes.
And the person in California, I'm healed. Then do you follow it up to the extent that you get medical evidence that proves that they were really healed?
I only look at published studies. I don't look at sort of far-fetched views. For this book, I actually did talk to a lot of healing masters, and I interviewed them, but I did it in a scientific way. I did it through what they call phenomenological questionnaires, because again, I didn't want this to be just what the skeptics call woo-woo stuff. I wanted this to be solid science, because I felt that's what was really necessary. This is what people want. They want an underpinning of science. So these were all published studies that had been looked at by peer-reviewed journals. And so it means that a group of people skeptically look at all this data and have to look at the medical evidence, have to look at all the evidence. So it's all there. It's all been demonstrated, or it wouldn't have been published.
All right. Is there any sort of percentage you can give me, or numbers that you can give me that would back this up? In other words,
what?
Well, you've looked at studies that proved what? Proved that somebody could heal 60% of the time, 70% of the time, 10% of the time? In other words...
Okay, well, this is a really interesting question, Art, because I was actually wondering, are there times when people can, heal, and sometimes when they're not very effective? And there are actually studies showing that certain people, when people aren't well in every way, when a healer isn't well in every way, if he's not, if he isn't, healthy physically and also in a positive frame of mind, his healing doesn't work very well. Now, that was another interesting study. But in terms of percentages, I think it really depends on the intention master. To say, there are some studies showing that prayer works, and I have problems with some of the big prayer studies that have been out now. There's some real problems with the way they've been set up.
I've been hearing that.
Some studies show. Sorry.
I've been hearing that there are, a few problems with some of the stuff that's been supposedly solid science.
It hasn't, there's these kinds of studies need as careful examination as anything, and a lot of them weren't set up in a very scientific way at all. To give you one idea, they didn't give the people who were praying didn't even receive anything beyond the first name of the people they were praying for. Now, that's pretty basic. You're not even sure who this is being targeted to.
Right.
So there's things like that. There are big problems and big holes in all the prayer studies that I looked at. But in terms of effectiveness, I think the real important thing is that you'd say that intention works at a significant amount of time in all of these studies. So that's got to be beyond 50%. So 60%, 70%. Some of the studies show 80%.
Wow.
And some of the studies show that intention is probably the greatest drug developed in the world. That I think that for some of the more conservative studies of mind affecting machine, for instance, if you look at the effect size of that, it is about 10 times as good as the effectiveness of something like aspirin. And aspirin has been considered one of the greatest drugs of all time.
That's true. But Lynn, doctors know, they don't talk about it much, but they know that the placebo effect is gigantic. I forget what the percentages are, but if somebody you believe is a good physician hands you a sugar pill and tells you it will fix whatever you said was wrong with you, a very disturbingly high percentage of the time, it cures you.
Absolutely. And in fact, some of the latest studies I've found have shown that doctors know this, and they will, in many cases, prescribe a drug that is not going to really do something. It only has a tiny bit of active substance in there, just so they can convince themselves it's got something in there. But they're counting on the power of the mind to heal. And the placebo effect is the greatest drug that we've got. The power of the mind works. There's an amazing couple of studies. One really incredible one where they did operations for arthritis, and they did regular operations on some of the people, and other people got a sham operation. In other words, they just opened up their knee and then closed it.
Wow.
And they found a year or so later that both groups claimed to be healed. The people that had nothing done got better. Other example of this, an example in Canada where they gave people with Parkinson's what they thought was dopamine, and it was just a sugar pill. And their brains started developing and producing dopamine. And
That's
in Parkinson's, this is the stuff that's lacking in the patients. So it's just the thought of it that works as well as any kind of active substance.
Okay. So when we get, for example, to a healer, somebody in California, and I'm going to get on the phone with them and tell them what's wrong, and they're going to send me vibrations to heal me, the big question is that person in California actually doing something for me, or is it me on the phone understanding that this is being sent to me, sending my own brain in motion to heal myself?
I think it's both. I think one of the things I was looking at for intention was, again, what happens in the receiver, what happens in the transmitter. Mm-hmm. And there is a subtle dance that's going on all the time. And that it's like a reorganization that's happening from the transmitter, and the belief of the receiver is also helping too. It's what they call in physics greater coherence. What some of the scientists I've talked to have believe is going on when somebody is ill is basically their frequencies are scrambled up, and that living beings have the greatest kind of quantum organization found on the planet. It's called coherence. It means that all of the waves in their it means that energy waves are operating in tandem, almost like an orchestra, where you've got individual players, but they're all contributing to this beautiful collective sound. And the view is that somebody who's ill is a little bit disorganized. In other words, that they're not quite so coherent. So the coherence of the healer is helping to restore that balance in the recipient. But the belief also has an effect as well in restoring coherence. So as I say, it's a kind of, there is information being generated, picked up and sent all the time. There's an antenna receivers going on all the time, information transfer between living things all the time at every moment. Every time we notice something, in a sense, we're sending an intention.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense to me. The central point of your book is that consciousness affects matter, correct?
Yes.
How do we actually set about, and I believe it, Lynn. I did some experiments here on the air that absolutely blew me away. I'm sure you do know about them, right?
Oh, I do, yes.
Okay, all right. So I know it's real. I just don't understand it. And I'm worried that lack of understanding, particularly when you're, trying to manage millions of people out there toward one idea, could backfire, and I might not do the right thing. But I understand the power of directed consciousness. It's astounding.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's a new paradigm. It's a new understanding, and as I say, what's being discovered right out there in physics, right out there on the frontiers, offers a paradigm where this works. The only reason that we think this is really strange is because we have this bizarre and old-fashioned view of the world that all of us are separate, and that we are all separate, and that the human body and all sorts of things out there are a finalized assemblage, that they can't be changed.
You have looked carefully at what's going on at Princeton, right? I hope.
I've looked carefully, yes, what's been going on all over the world. I mean, in terms of science. I mean, the Princeton people were fascinating because they set up, that's the PAIR group, the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Group. They set up this very scholarly program to measure whether or not consciousness could affect random event generators, which are a 21st century equivalent of a toss of a coin. And they are things that produce heads or tails pretty much 50% of the time when left to run on their own devices. And usually they're like a computer screen, and they'll have alternating pictures of, say, cowboys and Indians. And the PAIR people asked all their volunteers, and there were, thousands of them, to sit in front of these computers and to send their intentions to create more cowboys and Indians than on the screen, then to do the reverse, and then to try not to have an effect at all. And over hundreds and thousands of studies, they discovered that in a significant portion of the time, they could that they would be affecting these machines out of their random course.
There's no question about it.
There's no question. Well, of course, there are skeptics who attack it, but the evidence compounds over these hundreds of thousands of studies is very persuasive to say that there are effects. And
I agree with you. It's a new but not well understood power. Now, maybe you've come further down the road in understanding this power. We're approaching we've got so much to talk about. We're approaching a break, Lynn, so hold tight for a moment. This is exactly what I was hoping we'd be talking about tonight, and so it is. What we're talking about is real. It's not subjective. It's absolutely real. There are few things in this world that I absolutely believe in, but intention and the power to control, you bet I do. I'm Art Bell. I'm sure that one day science is going to understand and explain to us exactly what it is we're talking about tonight, why it works, how this information is transmitted from those with intention to the one who would be healed. Or, in a moment and after the break, I will explain how you can have intent even, for example, cure yourself. We'll be right back. Well, okay, here we go. Lynn, I'm going to tell you something I do personally that one of my guests some years ago told me about, and I've tried it, and it works. Here it is, and you can tell me what I'm doing.
Okay.
The person told me, lie in bed, close your eyes, and try and picture a white light, and then bring it down and just wash it over your body as you're lying in bed with your eyes closed.
Mm-hmm.
And it works. Now, I don't know what it does, Lynn. Maybe it's the placebo effect. I have no idea, but it's my own intention, believing that if I bring down and wash my body in this white light, it will have a beneficial effect, and it seems to work. Now, what is that?
What it is I wanted to try to extrapolate from all of these different sources, both science and the master intenders, a program that people could use in their lives. Also, for us to create for an experiment, and I'll get to that in a moment because my book is actually an experiment as well as a book. But the point was I wanted to get all these ideas. Well, what do they all do in common? What makes you a better intender? And one of the things that they all do is a thing I call powering up, which is they get their mind into a meditative state of some sort. And they use all kinds of different ways. Some healers do some things. People use rosary beads. They use mantras. They use anything like that to still the mind. And so for you, the white light was just a way it created a meditative state. And I think that's one of the first things that you need to do to get into a place where you can use your thoughts to maximum effect.
Okay. Well, that's all it is then. And everybody, or most everybody, can do it, right?
Most everybody can do it. But there are times, there are places. I mean, this is the other thing I was looking at. What other conditions help? And I found that even our relation to the planets, even certain geomagnetic times help. Using certain places again and again. There's been some evidence that the more you do intention in one place, the more it works. Stilling the mind is a really important thing, but also making your intention as specific as possible. Mm-hmm. Focusing on compassion. But a really interesting thing that I found, Art, was, everybody talks about calming down, and that the really important thing is to settle into what people call an alpha state, where your brain slows down.
Right.
And that was not what I found. One of the things I wanted to look at was what happens with people like monks. Buddhist monks are the biggest they're master intenders. They're able to take their minds and bring their metabolism down by up to about 60%. And that should be impossible. Or they have been known to bring their temperature up by about 20 degrees.
My God.
There have been studies showing that when they wrap around freezing cold blankets around monks who are clad only in, like little loincloths, they've been able to steam dry those sheets with their thoughts. So I figured, well, these guys know what they're doing. So what happens with them? There have been some really interesting brain studies of these guys showing that when they are in a state of intention, their brains aren't slowing down. They are speeding up to what's called a gamma state, which is a state of utter peak attention. It's about the fastest brain, it's the fastest brain waves the human body has. So these are people in an absolute peak state of attention. So for ordinary folks like you and me, it's important for us to still the mind, to calm down. But eventually we want to get to a state of peak attention to really, really make these intentions count.
Okay, I had not heard that before. You always hear quiet the mind, go into a meditative state, but you're saying the real masters of this while they do that, they then go into another state where their mind is extremely active on intent.
Absolutely. I mean, interesting studies of psychics. You know, the famous psychic and remote viewer Ingo Swann.
Yes.
He was studied as well while he was in the process of remote viewing. His brain was not in an alpha state of slowed down. That's when your brainwaves are like light meditation or light dreaming. His brain's waves were up there in gamma as well. So he had moved into a state of peak attention. So what I tend to suggest for people is that they try to do things like mindfulness meditation, which is a mindful and just exquisite awareness of the present, everything that's going on, what your breathing feels like, what the room smells like, just attending to every moment without judgment. And that helps you develop this state of peak attention.
Okay. You've looked at the studies of these people, or have you actually yourself ever studied these people, gone to these people?
Both. I conducted my own questionnaire with a lot of master intenders, and I also looked at hundreds and hundreds of studies all over the place in all kinds of areas to see what the science said and what the science said about people like this. Because now, I mean, monks are the favorites of the neuroscience lab. All sorts of places all around America and, in fact, the world are studying monks to see what this says about the human mind. And they found the studies that I'm talking about were done by Harvard's Herbert Benson, where he went out to Tibet and places like that and wired up monks to see what was going on in a body that could steam dry sheets and turn into the equivalent of a human furnace.
Yes.
And then there have been other studies where at the University of Wisconsin, where the Dalai Lama has flown in a bunch of his chief and experienced monks, and they've wired them up with EEG machines, studying their brainwaves to see what happens. And those are the studies that showed they go into a gamma state. And it even surprised the researchers because they also thought the brain slows down during meditation. Well, for these intention masters, it doesn't. It speeds up.
Okay. All right. So we can measure the fact that the brains are going into this gamma state. We can measure that something unusual is happening with their brains. We can even verify that it really works. But we don't, I think, we do not understand how it works, do we?
How what works? How intention works?
How something is. I depend on science. I'm a ham radio operator. I understand how a radio signal gets from point A to point B, but I don't understand how intention gets from point A to point B. And I don't think science yet understands that. It's probably in the quantum world somewhere, but we don't really know yet, do we?
Well, we do, Art, and that's what I've covered in my book. First of all, there's been some really interesting evidence done by Gary Schwartz. He was fascinated by those copper wall experiments done by Elmer Green, and these were studies showing that whenever a healer sends healing, that it gets recorded as electricity. There's an electrostatic charge that happens. And Green was able to measure this by putting these healers in a whole room that was a copper wall, surrounded by copper walls.
Right.
And copper is a great amplifier. And so he hooked up these copper walls to an EEG machine, which records, instead of recording brain waves, he was recording any kind of charge that was coming out of these healers. And he found that this was, any time they sent healing, this was going on. But Schwartz realized that Green was having a problem because any time these guys moved, they were also sending a charge. And so Schwartz thought, wow, this is the most interesting part of the data. Maybe every movement creates an electromagnetic signal that's picked up. And so he wondered whether or not human beings are transmitters of signals all the time. So he began playing around with these really fun studies where he would stick a EEG cap on a little bust of Einstein, and he'd start waving his hand over it, and he also attached this to a copper wall so it would amplify it. And he'd show his students that every time he waved his hand over it, there would be a big recording on the equipment as though this bust of Einstein had a brainwave. And really what was going on was nothing to do with Einstein. It had to do with Schwartz's hand. Every time he was moving, he was creating a signal. Then he did other studies showing that any time someone else did wave their hand and he put his hand out, he'd also cause a signal. So he was like the conduit of the signal. And what was going on was he was realizing that every movement we make, everything we do, is transmitting energy.
All right, well, I can buy that, but an electrostatic measurement, I can buy that, but I cannot buy how an electrostatic charge of any sort can affect a person from one side of the world to the other.
Okay, well then we move into the quantum world with things like this, and we move to somebody like, Fritz Albert Popp. Now, he is a German physicist who stumbled on the idea that living things emit tiny photons of light. We all dribble out a little tiny current of light all the time. And this is quantum information that's going on. And you know, with quantum information, there isn't measurable distance, that things can affect other things through a thing called non-locality.
Again, Einstein said spooky action at a distance. He didn't like it at all.
He didn't like it at all because it means, for anybody who doesn't know what it is out there, it means if you've got two quantum particles and they've been in contact one time, you can move one to Tokyo and the other to New York, and they will always be in contact. It's kind of like twins being separated at birth. And if you move one, you move these two apart, they still like the same color. It's like they still marry the woman called Jane. They both marry a woman called Jane, and if you knock one down the stairs, the other one breaks his leg too.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
They're constantly affecting each other, no matter how far they're apart. And so within the quantum world, you can have this kind of non-local effect.
But you can't understand it, Lynn. It's true. Everything you just said is true. But how that quantum action occurs, apparently faster than the speed of light, without respect to distance, nobody knows.
Nobody knows why this happens, but we can say it does happen, and it does happen with living things, and that we are transmitting and sending information all the time to each other. The other thing that's really interesting about this is some evidence that when you send a thought, that it's being picked up in every part of the receiver's body. There have been some really interesting studies at the Institute of Noetic Sciences called the Love Study, where they found that they had partners, one of whom had cancer, and the partner who was sending was the healthy partner. Every time he would send a healing thought, and they had them all monitored for everything, the recipient would receive this information by a correspondence in brain waves, in his heart waves, in his skin conductance, in different aspects of his body. And it demonstrated that any time somebody sends that kind of a thought, it's picked up in the receiver.
Well, this is really weird stuff, Lynn, but it's true. I know it's true. I just wish I could understand it, but...
Well, I think you have to think about a thought as a thing. And a thought that a thing is, it's a physical thing that affects other things. And it is like this current of light. A thought, like everything else coming out of us, is a current of light.
All right, we're going to have to settle for it's true, but we don't know how it works. Someday science may find out how it works. I'd love that. Maybe not in my lifetime. In the meantime, I guess all we can do is figure out how to manipulate it, how best to use it to our benefit.
Well, Well, that is really what we're looking at. I mean, the book, what I have tried to do with the book is not only put this stuff together, but test it. And that's the real purpose of the book is a global laboratory. I'm working with a number of scientists, and we're going to push the boat out and try to find out by using our readers and getting involved in sending out thoughts at the same time. So we're creating a giant group of intenders to see what happens when we all send the same thought at the same time.
God bless you. Good idea. Gary in Irvine, California, I get these little computer messages, asks a question that I also want an answer to, and it's simply this. Please ask Lynn if there are evil intention masters. Now, if this is a real power, like most powers, I would imagine that it could be used for good, healing, or evil.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've got a whole chapter about negative intention because that's the first thing anyone asks is, okay, what's more powerful, a positive thought or a negative thought? And how do I protect myself? Mm-hmm. And yes, there are loads of studies about this and they've done it with things like bacteria and viruses. Mm-hmm. Because when you think about it, oftentimes when you're trying to send visualization, let's say if you've got cancer, you're sending out a negative thought. All those visualizations that Carl Simonton did with his patients really basically said, think of your body as Pac-Man and imagine you're gobbling up your cancer cells.
That's right.
Well, that's a negative intention. It's trying to kill something. And that's what that's what that kind of visualization is all the time. You kill your cancer in order to live. And yes, there's been lots of studies of Qigong masters and things showing that they can turn on positive intention and negative intention. And that the negative intention is pretty powerful.
Okay, but you sort of did it's negative but it's positive kind of thing, like I'm going to shrink and kill my cancer cells. Let's really get off into the negative territory. Let's talk about, for example, a witch. Now, there are women who claim that they can actually physically cause damage to a person. So instead of eating up the cancer cells, which is a sort of a negative thing, suppose somebody claims they can not only create but cause cancer to spread in a person. Let's really get negative here.
Well, there's lots of evidence to show, as I say, with a lot of studies, that sending a negative thought is as powerful as sending a positive thought. And there's certainly been studies where they've measured with Qigong masters. They've had them alternately send a positive thought and then send a negative thought, and it's just as powerful. So, and there's that whole folklore about voodoo, showing that, lots of times pointing the bone at somebody. There have been certainly documented cases where people die from that. So I think that there's something in this.
Here,
studies
I'm really
that have been done on voodoo have only been, the studies I've seen have only tried positive voodoo,
Right, I'm really glad to hear you say that, because a lot of the woo-woo people say, oh, you can't do anything negative with this. It's only, the universe only allows positive things to happen. And I just never bought that then, and I don't buy it now. So I think you're right.
No, it's absolutely true that negative thoughts have power. There have been plenty of studies, they're in my book, about how negative thoughts can affect things just as much as positive thoughts. And certainly they found that in one study, it was hard for people to block it.
Hold it right there, Lynn. We have to pause here at the clock. I'm Art Bell. Get ready, folks, because here it comes. Intention. Now, what we're talking about here may not be all that new. It may be something that those of faith, those of religious persuasion, have always known. They know prayer works. I think we all know, well, not all of us, but I think most people know that prayer works. Now, I've got a very sensitive question for Lynn McTaggart when we come back, and that is, what do the studies, and that's what she's looked at, say about religiously based prayer for a person's well-being or health or whatever you might pray for versus raw, non-religious intention, raw, focused, non-religious earns for some reason. Police say the incident just might have stemmed in part from a language barrier. The port's cargo area was shut down Sunday as the Miami-Dade squad x-rayed the truck, scanned the whole thing for radioactive materials. Nothing unusual but what was found at all. Two of Saddam Hussein's co-defendants, you may remember, were taken from their cells, told they were going to be hanged on the same day the former dictator was. Their lawyer said Sunday the two condemned men still are waiting as Iraqi officials try and decide how to avoid the kind of outcry that followed Saddam's hanging on December 30th. So they still live. A subway train derailed Sunday near downtown Washington, sending 20 people to the hospital, prompting the rescue of 60 from a tunnel. The accident happened at about 3:45 p.m. near the underground Mount Vernon Square station that serves two lines beneath the Washington Convention Center. I wonder why they never print good news. I've wondered about that all my life, and I know many of you do. Democrats now running Congress will not give President Bush a blank check to wage war in Iraq, according to the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, suggesting they could, well, perhaps deny him the money. If he calls for additional troops, they may not supply the money. Yet Pelosi's second-in-command and a Senate leader on foreign affairs questioned the wisdom and legality of using the power of the purse to thwart the White House as Bush prepared to announce his revised war strategy this week. And I've heard that that includes about 20,000 more troops. That certainly would require money. And, of course, that's the way they have squished other wars. You know, just stop the money. The death toll from a riot at a Salvadoran prison rose to 21 after authorities on Sunday reported yet an additional fatality. Prison Director Roberto Villanova said the maximum security prison, about 40 miles west of the capital, San Salvador, will be under a state of emergency for 15 days. Warsaw's new archbishop abruptly resigned Sunday over revelations that he cooperated with Poland's communist-era secret police, stunning worshippers by sadly yielding the archbishop's throne just minutes before he was to be formally installed, to cries of "No, no," and "Stay with us" in and outside St. John's Cathedral. A very despondent Stanislaw Wiglas read a letter to Pope Benedict in which he offered his resignation, quote, "after deeply reflecting and assessing my personal situation." A Western Pennsylvania man's trying to solve a mystery that recently landed in his mailbox. It was a letter mailed more than 50 years ago and addressed to Frederick Zane Yost. The letter with a 3-cent stamp. Any of you remember a 3-cent stamp? And postmarked October 26, 1954, was encased in a large Postal Service window envelope. There is a return address in nearby Richland Township, but no sender's name. Well, maybe somebody in the administration felt the need to open it. Las Vegas. For more than a decade, Microsoft Corporation Chairman Bill Gates and others in the tech industry have touted a vision of a connected lifestyle, one in which digital content can move across devices throughout the home and be taken on the go. It's been a slow march, but as Gates kicked off the International Consumer Electronics Show late Sunday, the industry has come farther than ever in delivering on that promise. Kind of like robots. They never quite got here the way they were promised. All right, we'll take a break and look at some of the, as Paul would say, the rest of the news. Coming up in the next hour, Lynn McTaggart, and she'll basically be talking about the Force. That's right, the Force. It's a little more complicated than that, but it's going to be a very, 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 intent. It's going to be a very interesting interview. The remainder of this hour is going to be dedicated to open lines. So those of you who know the portal phone numbers are welcome to dial them now. If you have something of intense interest to this audience, and this audience does expect the unusual, then feel free to dial in. We'll be with you. From the high desert and the great American Southwest, I bid you all good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be in the world's prolific time zones, each and every one of them covered by this program, Coast to Coast AM. I'm Art Bell. It is my honor and privilege to be escorting you through the weekend. This being the second day of that effort. Just really great to be on board with you, and I'm being peppered with questions, email, and Fast Blast, and all the rest of it. For example, Keith in San Anselmo, California. Art, are you and your wife in Pahrump temporarily, till she has a baby? And are you both eventually returning to the Philippines? Well, who knows? I don't have the answer to that question yet. We own the condominium in Manila, and we are here until, I guess, my wife decides whether she wants to remain. As you know, it was not her first choice to come to the United States, and people ask, well, why did we? Well, that silly letter, that awful letter, going around, which has been going around actually the better part of a decade now, I think, that hate letter. Somebody wrote a hate letter, of all things, against Filipinos and sent it out in my name. Then it got published in newspapers there. And so it became a little dangerous, and that's more or less why we're here. Now, that won't go on forever. Or, on the other hand, it might. But as far as being here, I think we're here, sort of semi-permanently. I mean, obviously, look, after the baby is born, we will take a trip back to the Philippines and show off the baby, to her family. Nothing is forever. Boy, have I learned that in life. Nothing is forever, so right now we're here, and we'll be here until we're not. I guess that's the only way I can say it, but it looks like we're here. Let's look at the world news. Always fittingly depressing. Three legal immigrants, absolutely legal, in a cargo truck were detained at the Port of Miami Sunday on what was a routine inspection, which raised concern. Just a moment. The Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority is expected to announce its decision next week regarding some very controversial work. A couple of British scientists who plan to mix human and animal cells in order to research cures for degenerative diseases. I'm not sure how good of an idea that is. However, the British scientists believe that their plan of creating a partly human and partly animal embryo, if halted, might hinder their work on potentially life-saving new treatments that could possibly benefit hundreds of patients. The hybrid embryos, if created, would be around 99.9% human and 0.1% animal in order to produce embryonic stem cells, the body's basic building blocks that can grow into all other types of cells. According to the Telegraph's UK edition, and I depend on them heavily for news that we don't get here, the new embryos would provide new hopes for patients suffering from diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cystic fibrosis, motor neuron disease, and Huntington's, all terrible. Dr. Stephen Minger at King's College London and Dr. Lyle Armstrong at the North England Stem Cell Institute in Newcastle are the two lead researchers on this project. They've assured us all that the hybrid embryos would be destroyed within just 14 days, a time when they have not started developing much. According to Dr. Minger, informally, we have been told by the HFEA they are unlikely to grant permission for our application at present. We have no therapies to even alleviate the symptoms for conditions like Alzheimer's, spinal muscular dystrophy, and motor neuron disease. Never mind make an impact on disease progression. I just think it's not a good idea. Could there be forbidden sequences in the genome? Forbidden? Interesting word, right? Ones so harmful that they are not compatible with life? One group of researchers thinks so. Unlike most genome sequencing projects, which set out to search for genes that are conserved within and between species, their goal is to identify primes, DNA sequences, with chains of amino acids so dangerous to life they don't exist. It's like looking for a needle that's not actually in the haystack, said Greg Hempkin, professor of genetics at Boise State University in Idaho. He's leading this project. There must be some DNA or protein sequences that are not compatible with life, perhaps because they bind some essential cellular component, for example, and have therefore been selected out of circulation. There may be some that are lethal in some species, but not others. We're looking for those. But why? There must be some DNA or protein sequences that are not compatible with life and therefore have been selected out. To do this, he and his colleagues have developed software that calculates all the possible sequences of nucleotides, the letters of DNA, up to a certain length, and then scan the sequence databases, for example, the U.S. National Institutes of Health Gene Bank, to identify the smallest sequences that aren't present. Those that don't occur in one species but do in others are termed nullimers, while those that aren't found in any species are termed primes. That's really, really strange stuff, in my opinion. Very strange, and it sounds as though, and I could be wrong, but it sounds as though they're looking for something, well, they said it themselves, that would be incompatible with life. Now, why would you want to find that unless you were contemplating putting something together that would be harmful to life? Now, I could be way off base with that, and probably am. It just sounds that way in the story. Let's go west of the Rockies and say hello, Larry in Idaho. Hello, Larry in Idaho. For some reason, I'm not getting audio. They're going to have to turn it up on the other end there, or something. Hello, Larry in Idaho. Do you hear me, Larry? Going once.
Yes.
Going. Are you there, Larry?
Yes, I am.
You are. Where were you, buddy?
Going to get my glasses so I could see what you said.
So you could see what I said.
Sir?
All right, then read my lips.
Okay.